let's go then to an aspect of what you were just talking about that didn't come up in that scene, apparently, but is something that you mentioned in the rules and is something that you said you'd like to see. When the heroes disagree. To go back to our comic purism, the Cyclops Wolverine moral conflict has a very, very weird and spotty history. If we go back to Ancient of Days, we find that Wolverine was not originally the dependable veteran backbone of the X-Men. He was actually its most troublesome, hot-headed, loud-mouthed, poor judgment character. In fact, the iconic first scene of this actually has him yapping at Scott, much like a dog. Pissing Cyclops off, who turns around and backhands him. And this is, of course, long before the Frank Miller days, and so Wolverine goes ass over tea kettle after Cyclops backhands him. And comes up, with his claws out. And Storm steps in and talks him, and she doesn't talk him down. I take that back. She doesn't talk him down at all. She threatens him. She says, "No, knock it off. Or you're going to answer to me." And he's like shudders and backs off.
That's interesting.
So that was sort of Wolverine for the first round of the new X-Men.
Yeah.
There is an incremental process that took about 10 years for us to get to a state where I like to say Wolverine is like Nixon. If the president does it, it's legal, right? It's the Nixon thing.
Right.
Here, it's if Wolverine does it, it's moral.
Right.
And to the point where anybody, and I believe this actually got cemented by the cartoon of the 80s, which I'm not that familiar with. But I believe the idea was a lot like what eventually happened with the Punisher and the Daredevil, which is that the badass hero is doing what must be done, while the wussy hero wrings his hands like the female lead in a martial arts movie, and basically is a big load who really shouldn't even be in the scene.
Right.
And so that kind of has been cemented as the classic Cyclops-Wolverine interaction, is that clear-sighted, hard-headed, no-holds-barred, do what is necessary Wolverine is the hero, and why is that guy whining over there anyway?
Right.
And so I kind of would like to say that many, many, many hero interactions are pro forma. Disagreements, ethical disagreements between heroes are often very much what you described as, well, we're going to bitch at each other for a couple of panels over the cookie. And there you go. And that's it. And so the vast majority of these kinds of ethical disagreements between characters are exactly that. Then you have the few that are a little more emotionally loaded, like that initial Cyclops and Wolverine scene, which actually I think have some degree of dramatic content.
Right.
And I could even point to the iconic first Punisher and Daredevil story, which I confess is a little bit humpbacked and has a very dodgy publishing history and is very forced in some ways, but he does manage to get across a couple of points. And in that case, it's important because the Punisher is wrong in that story. And in fact, Daredevil calls him out. The most important page is when the Punisher is shooting his gun all over the place at Daredevil, who does a series of acrobatics through the gunfire, and then tells you exactly what he needs to tell you and the Punisher and the reader, which is, you don't scare me. I know you're missing me on purpose.
Mm.
And Daredevil's basically saying, no, I'm not, terrified of the man who will do what must be done, blah, blah, blah. Fuck you.
Right.
And so, and when the Punisher actually tries to go all the way in terms of the intended target that he's trying to kill, Daredevil recovers a fallen gun from the field and shoots him to stop him. So, in other words, Daredevil's basically both in moral and physical command of the situation.
Gotcha.
It's actually not ambiguous. That sort of touted, oh my God, the ambiguity of the two conflicting heroic ideals isn't there. And although it is a pretty good story in terms of the Punisher's position being well articulated and presented, more so than the character often gets, it is still... it's only later that people, I think, in a fairly fast shift just after that, when the Punisher gets his own limited series and then his own ongoing series, where they start front-loading all the situations so the Punisher ends up being right all the time. And that sort of bleeds over into Daredevil. So in later Daredevil stories, the Punisher is the one who's right, and Daredevil is sort of this inexplicably conflicted person.
Yeah, have you seen the Daredevil season 2? They have a pretty interesting interaction in that.
Right. I thought actually that they captured some really good stuff in that. But there were a couple of places. The series has sort of the curse of mining all the comics at once.
Yeah.
So that you end up with, packed into one story, you have every single imaginable symbolic showdown between Punisher and Daredevil,
right.
in rapid fire, one after the other. Some of them I thought were superior. Others, like the business where he's got him like chained to a chimney and stuff with a duct taped gun and all that, is a bunch of contrived bullshit. And it's almost too perfect that you actually have to literally chain up the hero and duct tape his hand to a gun in order to present him with the dilemma of whether to use the gun.
Right.
And even that's just kind of ridiculous, because in a far better story, as I just described, Daredevil makes use of... Daredevil is not Batman. He does not have like some sort of weird neurosis about the object of a gun.
Right.
And when it suits his need to use it, he does. So, he plugs the Punisher when he had to. Right. And so it's not exactly... that's what I guess I'm saying, is that we see stories in which the hero has to lose so much agency to be put into the position of having these sort of Philo 101 dilemmas, that the character is basically not a character at that point anyway. They've already been hogtied or bonked on the head or whatever had to happen in order to put them in that trolley.
Right.
And that's what I fear would happen here, is that if you are seeking to make the situations, but the situations depend very heavily, particularly the ones we're talking about now, they depend very heavily on the decisions that the players make.
Yeah.
So if that's going to be the case, and yet you are going to take agency as the GM of putting them in the position of these situations, then basically you're going to have to chain up the heroes and duct tape their hands to the instruments you want them to suffer over and make them do it. And so, I think that it's something to keep in mind. Again, you know what? This would be the most aggressive move, design-wise, to say that when two heroes come into conflict where they are literally like quoting their ethos at each other, that you pretty much have the situation where they can roll, and one of them will back down. They may not like it, and they may like grouse and never give up on what they believe,
right,
and say so, but they back down,
right,
and it goes the other guy's way, because that's what happens in the comic.
It's interesting.
And you can chew that up. This is actually dipping a little bit into the design I've done in my game Vigil. You can chew that up with as much violence as you want to. All the backhanding and all the flying lead or whatever it is. But in many ways, Daredevil's quote from that one issue is absolutely apropos. I know you're missing me on purpose.
Right.
You know, I'm... there you go. It basically, yes, one of us is going to stand down and probably bitch. But if we play this right, both of the players are going to enjoy this immensely, because both of our heroes had to kind of got to wave their flag, and we know that it went to the dice, and we're willing to abide by that. It's fun to see how it goes this time, especially because this particular kind of conflict is never, it's always in the moment. It's never long lasting.
Right.
The characters never win or lose the argument in the long term.
Sure, yeah.
So if you say this is kind of your no blood, no foul confrontation, and it will be resolved for purposes of what, you know, you guys are going to do, or who steps away and lets the other guy do what they're going to do, or the one guy who was about to do something says, well, I guess I won't, or anything of that kind, you know, enjoy it, because any one of those outcomes is fun.
Right.
So it, to me, seems, again, it seems to me as though you've already got it in your existing system by decreasing the mechanics of it rather than increasing. And in this case, you know, the consequence mechanics of the stated actions are nil. You know, this guy can shoot his death bolts at me all he wants in his fit of rage because I'm being such an idiot. But it's not like they're going to hit me. Or, you know, for some reason I'll just, you know, deflect my little eye lasers at the incoming death bolts and blow them up in midair, even though I've never done that before for any reason. But I will this time. Right. So is that kind of making a little sense? I mean, I'm trying to run with the system that you've actually already got in place.
Yeah.
And talking about when subroutines are called for and when they're not.